Well, thank you. I mean, in a completely unrelated football and sporting sense, I've just bought my first property today. It literally completed about half an hour ago. So yeah, I'm a rather good mood today, which I'm sure will probably change as soon as you start talking about Leicester. But yeah, no, I'm in a good mood. I'm very well, thank you.
How's that been? Obviously, buying your first house.
It's more stressful than watching Leicester. No, it's been an absolute nightmare. Um, Anyone will tell you that buying a house is a stressful process. But honestly and truly, I think that I'll rival anyone's in terms of how stressful and how long it's been. Yeah, no, it's been very frustrating. A number of occasions and moments I didn't think it was going to happen, but it did. It literally was like transfer deadline day, like
Yeah,
genuinely. In terms of what I was doing, I had to complete by a certain day, and I actually missed the deadline. But they allowed it because some of the paperwork was through. It's very reminiscent of Adrian Silva, all them years back, but they actually allowed me to have the house. So yeah, it's been pretty horrendous to be honest. But yeah, you forget it all pretty quickly once it's all signed and delivered. So I've got the keys, and yeah, I'm very happy.
well, congratulations on that.
Thank
Obviously,
you.
talking about Leicester, what's your thoughts on us this season?
Oh, it's a big open question, isn't it? In a nutshell, it's not been good, has it?
Yeah,
And it's now about damage limitation, isn't it? To be honest, it's about just staying in the Premier League, which it's is not obviously where we expected and wanted to be at. And it's strange, I remember at the start of the season when we started particularly badly, people were still asking and saying, "Well, where do you think we'll finish?" And I think most people were still like, "Look, we'll be fine. We'll probably finish mid-table still." But I remember a couple of people, and I think it may have actually been Ian Stringer, who put a tweet out saying, "Leicester fans, if we offered you 17th now, would you take it?" And everyone was incredibly offended by that tweet that so early on Ian was saying that in terms of his mentality. And I'd like it if Ian did that same tweet now and poll now and see what people said, because I bet you the percentages, whatever voted no then, will definitely be yes now. I'm absolutely certain of that. And I think that Brendan's mentality as well, in terms of when he said at the start of the season about the target being 40 points, I don't think that was particularly helpful. And he said something similar this week about how it was always the target. And yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of that kind of mentality in a football season, because I do think that somehow, I don't know why, but the players feed off it, and you end up then being in those situations. And he said about the Chelsea game, it was Ferraris against, what was it? Can't remember what car he uses, like a Fiat or something.
yeah.
Which again was like, I didn't like at all. So yeah, we're now at the point where 17th, I would snap your hand off, but I do think that this team really should have finished so much higher. But for a whole variety of reasons, we haven't.
But it's obviously disappointing with it looking like being Tielemans' last season. Madison's got a year left on his deal, and possibly losing both of them in the summer, not having any European football to attract and he plays with or anything.
Yeah, I mean the transition this club's going to go through over the next, it's not even the next year, but over the next couple of years probably, is absolutely huge. And you mentioned Tielemans, you mentioned Madison. I mean, we needed players as well, on top of the fact that those guys were going to leave. And we did some decent business, didn't we, in the January transfer window? But I reckon what, 7, 8 players will go out of the door in the summer, most of them out of contract, and then you'll probably lose a couple you don't want to lose. One being Madison. So you're looking like you're going to probably have to find 10 players from somewhere and replacing your two best ones in Tielemans and Madison. So there's so much the club has got to get right in this summer transfer window. But the problem is we can't really plan for that right now, because we don't know what
Yeah,
division we're going to be in. And also financially, it's not like we're in a situation where we can go spend £200 million to bring in these 10 players. So we're going to have to wheel and deal and somehow find some really good ones. As I said, what we did in January was good, and I think we'll have to do something similar, won't we, in the summer, but on a much bigger scale to bring those players in. To say I'm nervous would be a complete and understatement. The pressure on the club and who's running it right now is probably never been bigger. And we haven't even got onto the future of the manager. Is he going to be there to oversee this transition, this overhaul, which he's been talking about for so long? My gut feeling is probably not.
Who would you want to replace Rodgers? Obviously, if he does end up getting the sack or leaving.
I know this really annoys fans, but I have no idea. And I really wish I had a better answer for you. Um, if we were going to get rid of him now, before the end of the season, again, I'm aware that this will probably divide opinion hugely, and I'll probably get slated lots by some people. But I would genuinely try bring in someone like Nigel Pearson.
Yeah,
I genuinely would. I just think in terms of the kind of manager that he is, he would give everyone the boost that we need. Obviously, he knows the football club, and I just think his mentality in terms of what are the best things about Nigel Pearson is probably when you're in a dogfight, isn't it? He couldn't be any more different than Brendan Rodgers, and that's what scares me most about the end of this season is that historically Brendan Rodgers in the run-ins at the end of seasons, whether it be Liverpool or at Leicester, has been pretty hopeless. And he's never been in this situation before in terms of a relegation battle, which makes me even more nervous because he seems to have this air of it's not arrogance, but he's obviously trying to keep everyone calm, isn't he? But I feel that whilst doing that, people are then maybe not registering the kind of trouble we're in. Sometimes you need to make people know, look, unless you buck your ideas up, we're banging trouble. And if you carry on telling everybody you're great, and if you carry on doing what you're doing, you'll be okay. I think it's a bit of a recipe for disaster. So yeah, I'd bring in Pearson if I was going to make a change now before the end of the season. In terms of the summer, if we were going to bring in a new manager then, I really don't know. We've spoken lots about a few managers on the podcast who could possibly come in. There's a few guys in France. There's the manager at Lens. I can't remember his name. Apparently, he's doing very good things. A bit of a random one, which I'll throw out there as well, is Xavi Alonso. He's currently managing over at Bayer Leverkusen. I'm sure.
Real over there too.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that he'd jump at the opportunity to manage in the Premier League at some point. So I don't know how ambitious or realistic that is. But yeah, I've been keeping a little bit of a close eye on Bayer Leverkusen. I haven't seen Xavi Alonso being linked with any Premier League moves. So yeah, if I'm going to throw out a new name, I'm going to go with him.
I'd love to see Pochettino come to Leicester, obviously, if Rodgers leaves, but I think that's too unrealistic, like you said with Xavi Alonso.
Yeah, no, I think that Poch is holding out for Spurs. I know that for a fact. He desperately wants that job. And I saw this week that if Ancelotti leaves Real Madrid, that he could end up at Real Madrid. So any talk of Mauricio Pochettino coming to Leicester, I would quickly I'd quickly forget about that. Also, I think it's worth pointing out as well, because I've seen lots of people say this, saying, if we gave Tuchel or Pochettino the same salary that Brendan Rodgers is on, then they may be tempted to come. Leicester City are never, ever in their history going to offer another contract to a manager the same as what they offered to Brendan Rodgers, because of the problems that we've had by giving that contract out. The club, I understand why they did it at the time, but they've had their fingers burnt so much by the length of that contract and the size of that contract. I cannot envisage the owners ever giving out a contract like that ever again. So just like with the transfers and the players we're going to buy, I think that the managers will be in a similar market. Someone up and coming with a point to prove. It won't be any 10, 11, 12 million pound a year contracts going to a manager. So yeah, there won't be any Pochettinos or any Tuchels. It's about going out there and finding a manager. And in many ways, going back to kind of where we were a few years ago in terms of scouting and finding players, young players, and that worked really well for the football club, didn't it? The problems have come where we've tried to spend bigger money and more experienced players, and that's not worked. And I think that the whole club will recognise that, not just the players, but probably with the manager as well. That's probably the best route for the football club to go down these days.
Well, you said about signing young players. We saw in January, Harry Soute and Victor Christensen, two of the 3 January signings, young profiles, and came in and made a big impact on the team.
Yeah, and it's the wages of those players as well, which people need to recognise that. I don't know the salaries that those lads are on, but I would suspect it's not over £50,000 a week.
Yeah.
And I believe that at the moment Leicester have an average wage bill of around £84,000 a week, and there's so many players who, let's be honest, aren't worth that kind of money. And Leicester as a model was all about signing players, young players, ones with points to prove, and selling them on for big money. But when you're what, 26, 27 and already earning 70, £80,000 a week, you haven't got much to prove to anyone anymore, have you? You're earning millions and millions of pounds a year, and it's unlikely that clubs are going to want to try buy you, because they're going to have to pay you more money on your salary. And obviously at that age, at 27, there's not any resale value to you. So, the club have made some mistakes in terms of handing out those big contracts. I understand why they did it, because they were desperate to push on and challenge for the top four. And realistically, if you want to get into the top four, that's the kind of salary you need to be paying. But football moves fast, and we're no longer in that position. So it's back to signing players under the age of 23 and keeping the salaries under £50,000 a week. And, it's very doable. It is. You look at the Brighton side, look at the Brentford side. How many players do you think in that starting 11 or squad are earning more than 50, 60,000? A handful at best. So, Leicester have made some mistakes, and I think everyone now recognises that. But now it means that the pressure then turns to the scouting team to go out and find those players. As I said, I think that the signs are good, though. Martin Glover came in, didn't he, in September, the new head of recruitment, and his first window was Suter, Christiansen and Tete. And, obviously they haven't, proven themselves completely just yet. It still is early days with all three of them. But I'd say the signs were good.
Yeah, I think the only one that really needs to prove itself properly is Tete. He obviously had the debut against Villa, which was phenomenal, and then ever since then, they've been mediocre performances.
Yeah, no, he has. I still do think there's a player there, though. I do. But again, it's worth pointing out he is only a loan deal. So worst case scenario, if he doesn't prove himself, that the club haven't, lost out. They're not going to be stuck with it with a player. I do find it slightly bizarre, though, that it appears to be this constant curse of the right winger at Leicester, and why can nobody play on the right wing for Leicester? Post Riyad Mahrez, we've tried so many players now, haven't we? And I was utterly convinced that Tete was the answer before I saw him play at Villa, and afterwards, I couldn't have been any more convinced. I thought we'd signed an absolute superstar. But yeah, I have found it a little bit bizarre, his performances since then. He hasn't been bad. He's just been really, really quiet. And
yeah.
And when you think of just how good he was against Aston Villa, I'm surprised. I'm surprised, and I'm a little bit confused as to why that has happened. Because, I really did think that we'd signed someone there. The only thing I would say is that since Tete has come in, the performances of Harvey Barnes have improved. Pre-Tete, Barnes was struggling, and again, we've said this so many times on our podcast that, when you've only got one winger, which we did with Harvey Barnes, it's so easy to play against Leicester, because the route they're going, they're just going to go down the same route every time because they've only got one winger, and that must have been frustrating for Harvey Barnes, because he was just getting marked out of games. But now having two genuine wingers, it opens up the team, doesn't it? It stretches the defences. So sometimes, even if Tete isn't having an actual impact in terms of beating his fullback, what he is doing is at least preoccupying somebody that otherwise wouldn't be, which is freeing up Harvey Barnes. So, I think there are still, positives and pros to have in terms of having two out-and-out wingers on there. But yeah, I think that Tete does need to find some form in the next 10 games if he's going to convince Leicester to sign him permanently. I think very much the jury is out on him. I'm hoping, though. I'm hoping that he will do it. And I do believe he can do. I do believe he can do it. It's a big change for him, isn't it? Ukraine, France. He's never played at this level of football before. He can't speak the language. Maybe we all just got a little bit too excited after that first game, and we just need to be a little bit more patient with him, because there's a player there for sure.
Yeah, he's definitely got the talent to go kick on and get out of this relegation scrap. And like you said before, with having two out wingers, before it was James Maddison on the right, and he obviously likes coming on the 10, and he was out of position.
Yeah, exactly. And I talk about, freeing up Harvey Barnes, but it also moves James Maddison to his preferred position, doesn't it, of the number 10? So, I think that he is a player and he is still contributing to the side, even if we perhaps would like him to do a little bit more. But yeah, say that the big one is of course James Maddison, because if he between now and the end of the season plays like he was pre-World Cup, then I don't think Leicester will be all that worried about relegation, because I think he's that good. No one down there at the moment, do they, in the bottom 6 or 7 have a player anywhere near the same level of James Maddison. So, if he can give us 8 out of 10s more often than not for 5 or 6 games, then that will win us at least 3 of them. And then at that point, you're not too far away from surviving. So, yeah, Maddison is the key. I think that's quite clear. So yeah, Tete playing out there and making Maddison play in his preferred position. Again, that's a positive, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And you look at our next 3 fixtures, even they're all winnable games against Palace. Obviously away with the new manager bounce, Hudson coming back, and then Villa at home and Bournemouth at home. They're winnable games.
Yeah, I mean the game against Palace is frustrating, isn't it? That it's going to be Roy Hodgson's first game back, because if it had been a caretaker or if it had been Patrick Vieira, we would have been a lot more confident, I think, about picking up a result there. Now, look, I don't think that Roy Hodgson's going to have a massive impact at Palace. I think Palace are actually probably still in trouble, but you will get that initial manager bounce, won't you? And playing them first is obviously the worst thing to do, isn't it? After the international break as well, that place will be bouncing on Saturday. So yeah, that's not ideal. But look, they're not a great team. They're not, and their problem is, and their problem has been, that they haven't been scoring goals. Well, Roy Hodgson isn't going to come in and suddenly see a free flowing Crystal Palace side that's going to be scoring 3 or 4 goals. So we've got a chance on Saturday. And if you look at all of our fixtures between now and the end of the season, it's an interesting one, because there's a couple of ways you can look at it. It's only, I believe, Man City who are in the current top 4 that we've got between now and the end of the season. So on paper, in terms of like the average league position, they're games you would probably pick, because they're winnable games. But there's the other way of looking at it, is that by the end of the season, you don't really want to be playing teams down there towards the bottom, because the pressure, with them being 6-pointers, you lose those games, and it's twice as damaging, isn't it, as what it would be against a team in the Big Six. And those players and those teams, are going to be fighting for it more than anything else. Where in an ideal world, you want to be playing someone in mid-table, don't you? We've not a lot to play for. So sometimes you can get drawn into it and say, oh look, we're playing 15th, 16th, and 18th. They're good games. But, you don't want to be playing against the teams with more to fight for. But the other way you could then look at it is like, well, they are down there for a reason. They are the weakest team. So, yeah, I'm obviously clearly on the fence and flip-flopping between whether I think they're good fixtures or not. The next 3, what is it? Is it Bournemouth, Villa, and Palace? I think
3 games, 2 at home.
Yeah, exactly. I think if we can pick up a couple of wins from them, and we really can do, I think it's got to be the bare minimum 4 points over the next 3 games. And I know that sounds a little bit unambitious, 4 points, but I'd be as bold to suggest, with all the teams down there at the moment, not many teams down there will get more than 4 points over the next 3 games. And, the position and the situation where we're at right now is we only need to do better than 3 other teams, and 4 points would probably be enough to keep us out of trouble for another 3 games. So yeah, it's about damage limitation, isn't it? And if we can get a point at Palace, I'd be happy with that. The Villa game will obviously be the more difficult of the 3, and Bournemouth at home, we really should be winning. So that's where I'm at with them.
It's unfortunate with Palace, obviously, like you said, with the new manager bounce, not being able to score. And it always seems like Zaha is able to score against us somehow, no matter what form he's in, Crystal Palace is in.
Yeah, it's just one of them players, isn't it, that nobody really likes. I find him such a bizarre player. I mean, I find like he doesn't even like his own teammates. He's a strange character to say the least. But yeah, he is obviously clearly a very decent player. But yeah, Crystal Palace is just a strange team. I mean, it's more like a Jeffrey Schlupp. I can manage us losing 1-0 to a Schlupp goal late on. That's kind of more what I'm worried about than a Wilfried Zaha. Yeah, and also, I mean, defensively, if we're looking at where we're at coming into this game, the last one against Brentford, wasn't it? Evans was injured again. I mean, he's always injured, when's he not? And Fez was suspended, wasn't he? So I think that now going into this game against Palace, I don't know if Christensen's going to be back. Hopefully he's close to, but maybe the break wasn't the worst one in the world. And I think if Leicester are strong defensively, and they'll clearly have better personnel for the Palace game than what it did for the Brentford one. So if they keep it tight, as I said, Palace struggled to score goals, then Leicester have got a chance of picking up at least a point. And for Roy Hodgson's first game in charge, if you are to offer me a point, I'd take it. I really would.
Yeah, and we saw after the first international break earlier in the season, we had that losing streak, lost 6-1 to Tottenham, went in international break, beat Forest 4-0, looks unbelievable. So hopefully it will happen again.
Yeah, well, this is the thing with Leicester, isn't it? Or well, not even with Leicester. It's the thing with Brendan Rodgers' teams. We're just streaky. I was reading some article by a journalist called Richard Jolly in the Independent a little while ago, and he was talking about the miraculous consistencies of Leicester's inconsistencies, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
we're so inconsistent, but that when they're coming, at the start of the season, what was it, 6 defeats, and then we went and won 4, then we lost 3, then we won 4, then we lost 2. Do you know what I mean? It's always the same. We're either good or we're bad. It's feast or famine. We're just that kind of team, and we obviously had a really bad run, didn't we, before the Brentford game? So I think just all Leicester fans are now hoping we're about to turn the corner and win a few games now, because that's just kind of how it works, isn't it, with us? But my only worry with that is that, when you're in the middle of a season or the start of the season, there's less pressure, isn't there? And, those streaks will happen. But now psychologically, I think those streaks, almost are less likely to happen because now the whole dynamic of the season changes, doesn't it? I think it's quite clear that I don't really trust Rodgers in terms of this running, and that's probably my biggest fear. That probably is my biggest fear, that I look at the personnel that we've got, I look at the way we've been playing in the last few games. I think we've actually been playing okay. I look at the other teams down there, and everything suggests to me that we'll stay up. But then I just have to keep reminding myself that Brendan Rodgers has just got this miraculous ability to mess things up, in the home straights of seasons. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it's happened so many times that it can't be a coincidence. So, I'm hoping they're about to go into one of our streaky spells where we pick up a few wins, but I am terrified. I really am. I think we all should be.
Yeah, definitely. You see the two seasons we were chasing European football, Bournemouth and Newcastle, back-to-back games, pretty much identical. Man sent off, losing 4-1 to relegation team.
Yeah, I mean, the Bournemouth game obviously is the one that sticks in most people's minds, doesn't it? The Iheanacho, Dennis Pratt sub, Soyuncu kicking Wilson in the net. Horrible memories. They really were. Interestingly, with the Newcastle one, I didn't go to the game. Can't remember why, but I was watching it, and I think it was Soyuncu and Fofana played centre half together that day. Yeah, because Evans was unavailable, and it was like their parents had just let 2 kids out on their own, and they're without their minder, and like great players, but clearly just not a good combination. It was just pure chaos, wasn't it? And I remember, and I do this incredibly rarely, it was at half time, and I was fuming. I was just like, I can see we're going to do it again. We're going to throw this bloody season away again. You could just see it coming, and I had to turn off, and I went on a walk. Went on a walk for about an hour and turned my phone off because it was affecting me and bothering me that much. Because you could just see it coming a million miles off, couldn't you? And you've seen it with those 2 seasons, unfortunately, where we were tailing away. That everybody else, outside of Leicester, had this assurance and calmness that the Leicester would do it, but everyone, as fans, you could just sense what was coming, because we've been here before. And I'm just hoping and praying that we're not going to get that same sense this time around. But of course, the tail off or the collapse this season is going to have significantly more severe consequences, isn't it? If it does happen. So yeah, we need to start after this international break well. A couple of wins give ourselves a little bit of a cushion. I think we can all relax a little bit more. But until we get them wins, I think we all need to be very, very conscious of the fact that relegation this season is a genuine possibility.
Yeah, well, I think a relegation would cripple the club with stadium
It would.
expansions,
Yeah.
obviously Seagrave, the financial state of the club at the moment.
Yeah, no, it would be absolutely disastrous. It really would. I feel like the club is playing a game of chess or a poker here in terms of the decisions that they're making, because you look at the bottom eight and you can run through it all. Whether it be Palace, Bournemouth, Southampton, who else is down there?
Nottingham Forest, down
Yeah, well,
there.
the only teams who haven't changed managers, sorry, haven't Leeds. The only teams that haven't changed their managers are Leicester, West Ham, and Forest. I think it's particularly interesting with Leicester and West Ham that I think that the owners have decided that there aren't really any good managers out there, and that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. That who do you want to come in? Well, I don't know, because there are not that many good managers out there. I don't understand, or I don't know why. I don't know the reason for it, but they're just not. There isn't anyone where you think let's act now because we need to get this guy in. There's no one. So West Ham and Leicester have clearly looked at it and think, right, well, we've got experienced managers here, so I think we're probably safer to stick with the ones that we've got. Now, of course, the only time will tell, and hindsight will be the factor here at the end of the season. Where if Leicester and West Ham will stay up, then you can sit there and say, well, look, we've made the correct decisions. We stuck with two guys who've been there and done it and know what they're doing. And you look at the other clubs who made the changes, and whether it be Bournemouth again, you run through all these clubs, you go through all these clubs, and I've said this countless times. For me, they're all ending the season with worse managers than what they started with. Palace ended up with Hodgson when they had Patrick Vieira. Bournemouth, what did they have? Scott Parker and end up with Gary O'Neill. Leeds with Jesse Marsh and end up with Javi Gracia. Southampton with Ralph Hasenhüttl, and I've got Ruben Selles. I find it, baffling, and I just feel these clubs have panicked. And Leicester and West Ham are doing their best not to panic, but we do know that if you do make a change, sometimes even with a caretaker, that just gives you that little bounce, doesn't it, for 2 wins? And that's all you need. And that's all you need to stay up. So I feel Leicester are being brave here in terms of not acting and sticking with Brendan. They've decided that clearly that's the safest thing to do. But of course, if we do go down, we then look almost foolish in the fact that we haven't acted when everybody else did. And, as you said, financially, what it would mean for the football club, it's almost not worth thinking about it, because we're going to be saddled with players on massive wages. We're going to then lose the one, say, for instance, Maddison, his value, say, for instance, if it's £60 million right now, if Leicester get relegated, you can slash that in two. It's going to be 30. It would be absolutely horrendous, but it would be for most of them. And, I'll throw in Everton as well there. Everton, they've just been done for financial fair play, and they are going to get done for financial fair play. We had Kieran Maguire, the financial expert, on our podcast a little while ago. And he was saying that football clubs were allowed to write off a certain amount of money due to COVID losses.
Yeah.
And, I think Leicester, writ off about £70 million in terms of, it's like basically doing an invoice on your taxes and claiming back to saying, look, that was down to COVID, so we don't need to worry about that. I think Aston Villa claimed back about 50 million.
Yeah, go. Where you finish.
Yeah, so that will catch up with them. They've just bought a new stadium, a couple of £100 million, and there's still issues around. I mean, their wage bill's massive, and their owner, in terms of, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Alisher Usmanov, he was the main man bankrolling that football club. It's not Farhad Mashiri. So I think Everton would also be in a world of trouble, and I'd argue significantly worse than Leicester's. So, Leicester and West Ham will be the two clubs desperately hoping to stay up. Leicester, Everton, and West Ham, they're the three with the biggest to lose, and they are the three in big trouble. They really are. So Leicester need to stay up. And as I said, it's almost not worth thinking about if we did, what would happen financially. It would set the football club back years and years. I'm sure of it.
I think it would be multiple years till we come back up too. Like you said, financially we'd be ruined, and selling half our players for half price pretty much essentially. Barnes will probably leave. Maddison, only two real sellable assets we have.
Yeah, although I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember. I mean, Leicester did get promoted from the Championship with a team administration. What
Yeah,
was it, back of 2002? Was it? It was around that time. So look, it can be done. And look, even for example, look at Burnley this year. They were in big financial troubles, and they're under an EFL embargo at the moment in terms of spending money. They lost all their players. McNeil, Tarkovsky. Um, Nick Pope. You go through their whole team. Anyone who was decent at Burnley left. But they then brought in a young manager in Vincent Company. They've used the loan market well, and they're now playing better football than they've ever done, and they're going to be back in the Premier League next year. And you could argue they're now in a better position. So, of course we don't want to get relegated. Of course we don't. But I don't think we should go to the lengths to say that it would mean that we wouldn't be back for years and years. I think financially it's obviously going to trouble the football club, but as long as you get the setup right on the pitch, you can bounce back. And those parachute payments, I'd say that if you had to do it within 3 years, if it took you longer than 3 years to get back, then you're in trouble, because you're then on the same financial footing as everyone else in the Championship. And it goes without saying, having that parachute payments is massively helpful. So again, it's not a comparison I really want to make, but remember when we got relegated to League One, that the club had been treading water in the Championship for years. We were talking about promotion every year, but the club was a million miles away from it. We didn't have the finances. The club was a bit of a mess, to be honest. And going down to League One actually forced the club into that reset button and bringing in Pearson and bringing in young players. And that was the start of everything, wasn't it? So sometimes clubs need that reset. And, if worst comes to worst, then that's how you've got to look at it. You've just got to see it as, well, that's awful. Didn't want that, but we've got to make the best of this situation. It's an opportunity to clear out everyone you don't want and bring in some new players and start again. So, as I said, it's not where you want to be, but if that really doesn't truly happen, you're just going to have to try find a positive spin on it like that.
but you see with Sunderland, they went back-to-back relegations and now to League One, and now they're back in the Championship mid-table. Obviously not where they want to be, but they're rebuilding slowly but surely.
Yeah, no, and it is possible. Ipswich are about to do the same. I think in League One, Norwich went down, Wolves went down to League One, Sheffield United did the same as well, and they're going to be in the Premier League next year. So look, I know with football fans, sometimes everything has to be black and white, and everything has to be, great or awful. But you just need to remind ourselves that if football doesn't end at the end of the season,
Yeah,
sometimes you have bad seasons, sometimes you have good seasons, and if we have a bad season, then it just means that we need to have a good one next season. And I know that sounds kind of almost really, easy to say, but it's also the reality, isn't it? That, football does not end. If Leicester get relegated, we still have a football club. It's just going to be in a different division. And we go again next season. And in 10, 15, 20 years' time, the football club's still going to be there. And we can talk about what happened back in 2023. So look, we need to do everything we can to sort out this season and make sure the worst doesn't happen. But if it does, you're just going to have to take it on the chin, take your medicine, and go again, because that's the beautiful thing about football. There is another season.
yeah. That's, like you said, there's always another season, and unless you're really unfortunate, go down League Three, League Four, you might be looking at Bury or one of those
Yeah,
examples.
I don't think we need to worry about that. I think that particularly with our owners, yes, there has been criticism of him of late, but he has absolutely got the club's best interests at heart. And I think that even if we did get relegated, I don't think he'd then sell up. I think he'd do everything he can to get us back in the Premier League, because he would feel a certain degree of responsibility for that. So yeah, it's all ifs, buts, and maybes, isn't it? And hopefully it doesn't come to any of this. But I do think we are still owned by a very nice man, and he is a rich man. And I don't think he'd leave us in a worse position than when he took us over. He'd certainly do his best to make sure that didn't happen. So yeah, we'll wait and see.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on, Jake. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem whatsoever. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, cheers, mate.